Okay, first of all, let's meet the party. This is a story that I'm not particularly proud of. It's one in which I lose my temper and utterly wreck a game, but I think it's share-worthy, nonetheless. The first time I was with this specific Pathfinder group, I'd found them through an ad for them somewhere which I won't reveal for the sake of their privacy. I went there because I'd figured it'd be a fun experience since almost all the games I'd played for like 5 years had been online in some way, rather than in person. I brought a couple of boxes of cheap pizza with me as a contribution to the snack table, and we got down to business. The GM, a big grizzly bear of a man. Now, I'm pretty tall, but he made me feel short. He was nice enough and fairly good human, but he was a tad gruff and ham-fisted in some of his tactics for coaxing players through things. I'm probably being critical, though all things considered. His games were basically Pathfinder 3.5 with epic level progression rules and a lot of 3.5 fluff. He also had a neat house rule about permanency applying to any spell or psionic effect for a standardized amount of gold for the spell's level, though they could be dispelled or disrupted as usual. I cringed when I heard that the story proper was going to be riddled with psionics, which I am far from a fan of. But I thought I'd grit my teeth and bear with it, despite my prejudice against them. The plot was basically that magic was slowly falling out of use as more and more people spontaneously developed psionic powers, and the rest is the plot of an X-Men movie. I think the GM didn't want to allow players to use psionics, but to be honest I couldn't really tell because that went out of the window way before the session even began. We were level 20, supposedly the best of the best, and were supposedly going to be facing epic level challenges. Next we have Nancy Nochin, a scrawny little guy with what appeared to be a missing chin. He was quiet and out of the way, and he never really did much out of character-wise, so I can't comment too much on his real character. He played a monk / psionic fist / soul fist variant, who was basically the stereotypical Zen, master of the self, I only want peace but will kill you guy of the party. The character was so bland, I don't even remember anything else about him. Next, there was Fishface. Now, I emphasise here, she wasn't ugly, but she was bug-eyed and looked like she'd had silicone injection in her lips. So I couldn't help but superimpose a big carp over her every time I looked at her. It's probably for the best, because I was too distracted by this mental image to really pay attention to a lot of the stupid shit she said. She was at most times trying to drag politics or religion into debate, where it was a non sequitur or a red herring altogether. Her character was an annoying as shit Wyler, who was the typical fiery tempted Mary Sue. She geared up to be the nuke of the party, and it was a fucking drow with trite wasp ethics. Yeah. After that, there was the only decent player, who, by the way, was not me. I want to point that was not me. He was a really big guy, and not at all fun to look at. But he was mostly pleasant, and seemed to know his stuff. He wanted to play a bard, but the GM convinced him to play something else. Through the same means he convinced me to not be a UMD-focused rogue. Namely, min-max or get the fuck out. And he ended up playing a Magus. It was kind of interesting, because he played him like a tribal warrior / shaman, whose tribe was in deep shit because of the developments in the more developed parts of the world and was attempting to save his people from being disturbed by the recent events. He was also really creative in combat. All in all, I think he was the only one who put real effort into the game. Now, unfortunately, we move on to that faggot. And by the way, I'm not using this to insinuate he was gay. When I say faggot, this guy is the epitome of the insult definition of the word faggot. Separate in your mind any concept, any idea you have of associating that word with gay. Just get that out of your head. Because this guy gives a bad name to faggots everywhere. Everywhere! Worst of all, he had no concept of personal space, and he liked to play up gay stereotypes. That was part of the problem. This guy lacked any concept of the phrase, I am not gay. Now, thankfully, he did have a concept of, if you touch me there again, I'm going to pummel you and file a sexual misconduct suit. I suppose I'd be flattered if it was a woman, but god damn, this guy was a fucking creeper. It didn't help that his character was what I called, out of character, the date rape scion. Seriously. That faggot would probably turn people homophobic if they'd never met a normal gay guy before. Now, as to myself, I was making a high charisma, trap making / disabling, and UMD focused rogue, but was flat out told, in so many words, that I needed to make a min-maxed, power gaming character or I wasn't going to get to play. I took offense, so I made a wizard. Stereotypically dressed with the conical hat and the robes and tiny glasses. I wanted to give him a beard, but apparently in this setting, elves can't have facial hair, so I said his eyebrows grew down to his belt. It was an old fossil of an elf from back when magic was the milk and honey of the world, and was going to recruit anyone he saw with even a modicum of magical talent in an ill-advised attempt to save the practice of magic in a world of pervasive psionics by showing up on random people's doorsteps, telling them their children were wizards, and then spiriting them off in a way to a greater demi-plane or a castle, in which his cohorts would be there to teach him magic. Now, if you get the joke, you're smarter than most of the group. Most of my feats were item creation ones, so that I could have the wands and staves that I loved to have in my arsenal. Now, we move on to the story proper. Party strife, just a few minutes in. It wasn't a good start. I was already being an asshat, because I had sand in my crack over being told to min-max or get the fuck out. And Fishface and that faggot were annoying as fuck too, which was adding to my ire. We finally start the session. We congeal off the walls of a high-end tavern in some urban area. Some plot, and then we go wandering about. I spellcraft and detect magic every apprentice-level kid I see, and try to discreetly determine if they have any talent. The GM blocks this at every turn for understandable reasons. I mean, it would derail things. But at the same time, the date rape scion was dragging NPCs off all the time and attempting to describe all the terrible things he was doing to them. I told him to knock it off more than the GM did, and the GM sent me a few warning glances about it. But seriously, I don't need to hear about the date rape scion unleashing all his fetishes on villagers. The date rape scion also harassed my character in character, but I slept the protection of evil on myself, and he couldn't physically touch me for a while. I ended up making it permanent later, because I knew the little fucker was counting down for the spell to expire, so he could get on with touching my wizardliness inappropriately. Thankfully, I packed a lot of diamond dust with me for some of my more powerful magic, so I could see what I could do with the GM's very generous permanency house rules. The fiery-tempted Wild Sue gave my character flack, calling him paedophile in character, with great vindication, as if it was the scummiest act imaginable, which was funny coming from a drow. Granted, I suppose some of his stuff with scouting students could appear a bit like that, but dear sweet Odin, why target me and not the Scion, who was sneaking off to rape NPCs whenever we were pausing to investigate something? The Wilder continued to lambast me for reasons I didn't fully understand, with which I retaliated with a long-winded pontificating ramble about how magic was dying and why it needed to be passed on. This had a lot of old man rambling stereotypes about the good old days, with lots of Partridge Farms references, and ate up a lot of time with it. Although I did stop to occasionally note that my character was indeed going about his business and proceeding towards the obvious goal of the current plot point. It was about a minute into my good old days spiel when she started talking over me with this weird line of dialogue. It was like she was projecting her hate for an ex onto my wizard and darvoing the fuck out of her, which got confusing fast, so I used the message cantrip to talk into her ear about the good old days and leave the general area so my wizard would be out of earshot. Now, I do know message technically establishes two-way conversation, but I argued that because magic was so obscure now, like someone being fluent in Esperanto in Asia, that she wouldn't know how without a spellcraft or knowledge arcana check of some kind. Fortunately, she didn't have either trained, and I got to be petty and talk about the good old days without having to listen to IC, or, thanks to the GM, out of character either. I only kept it up for a couple of minutes, then went back to the plot right afterwards. Now, this is the thing. The Wilder tried to kill me about 10 minutes after I rejoined the group, after a brief detour. Apparently she was incensed at the fact that I found a cheap way to make it so I didn't have to listen to her, but could prattle on like the old man my character was. Luckily, I hadn't been flat-footed, having good line of sight at her, and won the initiative. So I beat her stupidly high spell resistance and turned her into a newt, because my character was all about the classics. One mage hand later, and I held her newtified character in my hand and decided that I'd talk about why the newt baleful polymorph was such a classic. The date rape scion and the monk scion both decided to defend her character and demanded that I release her at once. Not wanting everything to devolve into fighting, I played it off as if my wizard thought they wanted her released into their custody, and told them that they looked like they could handle any of the kids' hissy fits. He handed her over and began to walk off, conveniently forgetting to undo the effect. They cleared their throats and got his attention about it, and I told them that they could hire a court mage to dispel it. And then they reminded me that mages were almost extinct. Oh! I then dispelled the baleful polymorph and went, "Oh, silly me," and walked on. I think they were all pretty upset, save the Magus, who was being old sage and witch doctor in the background of all this, and trying to keep peace, like a good guy. After that, things got a bit strange. You see, Fishface, No Chin, and that faggot kept going off during breaks, and huddling and even passing notes during the session, in what they probably thought was a discreet manner. Now, maybe it's my trained eye for watching various students texting, but they were really, really fucking obvious about it. I figured they were going to gang up on me at some point, so I just kept the scroll of plane shift in one hand, in case I had to escape, figuring that being a wizard would let me excuse just happening to have a scroll ready. Fortunately, whatever was going to happen was put off when what was apparently the big bad monster showed up to cause havoc and monologue at us. As we sat there being told that his awe-inspiring feats of psionic power were terrifying even to the likes of us, blah blah blah, we were obviously not supposed to fight him because he's too powerful. I would later find out he was some kind of level 40 scion / psionic prestige class thing. Apparently he was trying to turn scions against non-scions, blah 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 blah. Okay, he is a psionic supremacist. Oh my god, this Magneto. That sort of bastardry. Anyway, Fishface tries to get my wizard killed by the monster by attacking him and rolling bluff to make it look as if it were me that had attacked him, before proceeding to bugger off. No Chin and that faggot soon follow. The good guy Land Whale stays for like a round before he gets out of there too, after my wizard assuring him that he'd be fine and to go. I was only really worried about losing my gear, since I had a cloning lab set up in my demi-plane, and would just appear there, with a couple of negative levels and no items. Not that the others knew that. Those dicks just wanted my character to die. The monster looks at me and asks who dared attack him. I play the part of the senile old man, picking up his scrolls and looking through them while failing to make a coherent statement. While doing this, I ask the GM for a planes check, so that what I'm about to do isn't metagaming. My obscenely high planes roll let me know, in the GM's words, everything about the plane of force, which was the specific plane that I wanted to know about. I managed to get out a read magic in the meantime, which the GM is nice enough to not make me roll initiative for, and I activate a scroll of time stop that I had retrieved in my confusing old man act. I get lucky on the roll, and I've got 5 rounds to do whatever in. So, what do? I cast Planar Adaptation on myself, pull out a scroll of gate, and slide on over to a specific point in the plane of force. The point that that particular scion has the biggest psionic connection to. Because of the various books the GM had informed me that he'd be using, I knew on a meta level that scions are all connected to the plane of force. Now, if you do it right, you can go on an Easter egg hunt and sever a scion's ties to the plane, which is a lot like forcibly making a cleric or paladin lose the favour of their gods, in that all of their abilities go bye-bye. Since the GM was so kind as to tell me that I knew everything about the plane of force, I thought I'd go and ruin the monster's day. Now, I only had 3 rounds left in my time stop, and didn't really want to risk the big monster figuring out what happened and being trapped with a level 40 scion on the plane of force, regardless of whether I was a wizard or no. So I got busy, and I cast Gate. The gate to the point where the place between the negative energy plane and the quasi-elemental plane of void was. I then took advantage of the GM's oh-so-generous permanency house rules and dumped 25,000 gold pieces worth of diamond dust out of about 100,000 that I had in my person, on making the gate permanent. Not wanting to be there when the chaos from that started up, I renewed my time stop and plane shifted to the material world and watched the unfolding chaos. Thanks to my second casting of time stop, I had another 2 rounds to do with as I willed. So I cast an extended black tentacles and greater invisibility on myself. After that, I just spammed the maximized empowered innovate sort of staff until the fucker died. With Psionics fizzling out of existence, he was a level 40 commoner. Thankfully, there are no saving throws against innovation, so he died quickly, and the GM had no plot, because Psionics didn't exist anymore. The plane of force was gone. The monster was dead, and there were no more scions anywhere. I then told the GM that my next step was to expand my attempts to teach magic, so as to fill the void created by the missing scions. It was at this point that we had our first scratch, because, if I may describe the GM's internal thought process at this time, they were more or less, "What? No, that can't be! The party can't win a few hours into the first session and take away all my plot. Retcon time!" That was more or less his internal thought process. You see, the GM proceeded to change things back to before I started casting end events, and then he got dramatic about the earth shaking from the wild things being thrown out willy-nilly by every scion in the material plane. And I managed to cast Psionic Resistance on myself, a spell the GM had made available as an analogue to spell resistance, since scions were everywhere, and that helped me avoid some nasty stuff that was being tossed in my direction. Every scion was apparently discharging every power point they had at random. Because I used plane shift to get back to the material realm, the monster apparently had his psionics under control. And so I was confronted with a monologue of doom from psionic chaos being thrown around the midst of it for drama. I pull out another scroll of time stop because I hadn't asked and other things, because, well, why not? I then cast Planar Adaptation on myself and immediately left to one of the many private demiplans I had without waiting for him to finish. The monster followed me through, well, I assumed it was GM Fiat. So I cop out and get a scroll of Great Demiplane out of my handy haversack. A scroll because I don't have 6 hours to actually cast the fucking spell. So I can now add a new property to the demiplane we were standing in. I chose non-psionic. The GM stares at me blankly. I said that one of the many things you can do to a demiplane is make it so there's no magic in it. Since he provided so many magical items that could affect psionics, like psionic resistance, detect psionics, and other things for the sake of the setting, and left it open to other things, I said it was only logical that I could do it with the demiplane. He changed the rules again, saying that psionic's connection to the plane of force is inherently different from magic, and makes it so that the demiplane cannot block it out, even though there's such a thing as an anti-psionics field, but whatever. I personally think it was the GM not wanting his terrible monster to turn to a level 40 commoner again, but that's just my opinion. Since the GM had vetoed letting me negate psionics, in this plane I had a bunch of constructs that were mining and crafting things, because you can totally do that if you give them a brain. Expensive, yes, but awesome, definitely. This demiplane had a fire-dominant elemental trait, so my constructs that healed with fire damage healed obscene amounts of HP per round, and already had a buttload of temporary HP on top of their normal max, because this is where they lived. So I cast Dimensional Anchor on the monster, and used my control over the constructs to just have them drop what they were doing and mob him. After that, it was a casting of Greater Invisibility, an anti-detection spell, and spamming maximized empowered innovations until the big monster was dead again. This was, by now, the third scratch that the GM would do. And he proceeded by simply telling me, "You're out," and throwing me from the house. The GM didn't even bother to rocks fall me. He just told me I was out. No matter how many retcons the GM used, he couldn't think of a way to salvage his plot without writing me out of the game. And that is how I was kicked out of a Pathfinder session and a Pathfinder group at the very first session of the game. Thanks for listening.